Welcome to She Sells Radio. We are continuing our series on prosperity laws with today jumping into the prosperity law of fearlessness. And I actually think this is going to be a multi-part episode because there's so many parts to this and it just deserves the space. So we're going to take this in a couple different chunks. And I also wanted to share, sometimes people will ask and say, like, where do you learn this stuff? And it's been a journey of like finding the resources, finding the teachers. For me, it started with really Bob Proctor was one of my, one of the first people I really learned a lot of this from. And what I'll share here is with this series, a lot of the laws I'm bringing to you are from studying some of Catherine Ponder's work. So if you haven't read Catherine Ponder, she's got these phenomenal books all about prosperity laws. You can go check them out. And they're also, I think, really powerful if you, let's say maybe you have a Christian background, but you want to learn some of the metaphysics of the Bible and of prosperity. And maybe you were raised in an environment like me where it was never like consciously out loud said, but it was very, I would say, ingrained in the teachings in the church that I went to growing up of like, you must suffer, you're not worthy. All of those things were like very strongly embedded as neural pathways for me growing up. And so I really appreciated a lot of Catherine Ponder's work because it helped me open up to a whole different understanding of biblical teaching. So this prosperity law of fearlessness is a powerful one. And again, there's a lot of moving parts to it, but it's one that you can use when you find yourself feeling like you're in some sort of a bondage situation. And I want you to check in your life right now. What part of your life currently feels like bondage? Is it your financial situation, right? Maybe that's kind of what we're talking about here. Maybe that's why you're here. Feeling like you're still saying no to what you want to say yes to, feeling like you got to check the bank account for everything. Flying coach when you want to fly first class, not being able to give the amount you want to give to the causes you care about, right? So is it that? Or maybe it's, I work with a lot of women who are in a job or a career situation that's not feeling aligned anymore. And it's something that they were actually not always, but often it's something they were lit up about at the beginning of getting into it. And now they're months or years or decades into it. And they're like, it doesn't feel like me. Like it feels like bondage. Or maybe you're kind of self-manufacturing your own bondage by feeling like you can't speak your truth. You can't show up as your full self because of some sort of obligation to your company, right? So again, maybe you're in corporate and there's something that you're really passionate about outside of the company that you want to like build a brand around or speak about, but you feel like you've got to kind of toe the line because of the paycheck, right? Like that is bondage. Let's call it what it is. And one of the things that Catherine Ponder says, which I love, is anytime you have gotten the good out of an old situation, that same situation now becomes bondage to you. So I want you to really take a moment and think about it, because I had to take a couple minutes and like really dive into what that means, which is in any situation that we're in, there is usually a period of time where, not always, but often, we're excited about it at the beginning, whether it's a new relationship, a new career, a new opportunity, a new place that we live. And we can feel really excited about that and really in alignment for quite a bit of time often. But then once that situation has kind of run its course and you've gotten the good out of it, what was once your bliss, what was once your happiness, now feels like bondage. And I also think about this for us in the financial up level, because there was probably a version of you at some point that said, oh my gosh, if I could just make this amount, life, like I'd be set, right? I wouldn't have to work for the rest of my life. At least if you're like me, I had very limited understanding for many years of my life of what it really took to live a full life in our society. And I thought, oh, if I could just, for me, it was six figures. And it was like, if I can just make six figures, I'll be set. Now, I got nothing on that. That's the first point I help women get to in their financial journey. But for most of them, that's not where they want to stop. But for me, I like that felt like freedom for a period of time when I was younger in my consciousness. But then you reach a point where what once felt like freedom, now because you've expanded, feels like bondage. And so checking in with where in your life are you in what feels like a bondage situation, even if you haven't wanted to accept it, you haven't wanted to acknowledge it, you've said, it's okay, I can deal with it, it's not that big of a deal. Lying to yourself, at least. Stop lying to yourself and open up to like acknowledge what's showing up, that this thing that maybe used to feel good now feels like bondage. So once you've acknowledged that, you can then employ this prosperity law of fearlessness to start breaking free of that bondage. And so there's a couple steps that Catherine outlines in one of her books, which this one is based on The Millionaire Moses. And the first step is to actually make the effort to get out. So there's a great deal of persistence that comes into play with this law in particular. And when there is a situation that we are looking to shift, we get to be so committed to, no, this is happening. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what it takes. I don't care what I have to do. And this is not about like, we're going to go hurt people, right? So that's not what I'm saying. But really being in the energy of, I will show up every day and persistently, fearlessly claim that I am no longer in bondage to this situation. And there are elements of that that will feel fearful. You know, I came into this without like a story plan or an example plan, but I always like to try to give examples. So, you know, the one that's coming to mind, I guess right now, is earlier this year, I had really like scaled down a lot of team and was kind of running lean and mean. And that honestly felt good for a bit. So it was like, that was the situation that felt really good for a while. And then it started to feel like bondage. And it started to feel like I was in this prison of my own making. And it felt heavy. It felt like I was doing all the things myself, because guess what? I was. And what had once felt good no longer did. And so there had to come this point where it was like, no, like this is not happening anymore. This is not the situation anymore. And I am going to fearlessly and persistently step up and claim and call in my dream team to help really build and carry this company to a new level and serve our clients at a higher level, and be able to expand what we're doing in the world. And it took some persistence, and it took some fearlessness, and it took some willingness to make some radical shifts and big and, you know, pretty big investments, what felt like all at once, to be able to get this going. But that is what is required, is that fearlessness and that persistence, knowing too that there will be things along the way that don't feel like they're working. And I think that's actually what we're going to talk about in the next part of this series, is what do you do when it feels like things are getting worse or when something isn't getting better? But the other key part, the other step, so the first thing is you got to make the effort. The second step, and this is so important, this is probably the most challenging part, is you've got to stop talking about the problem. So you got to stop talking about it, because again, whatever you focus on, that will expand for you. So the key is you get to realize the power of your words the power of what you speak over your life and speak over the situation. And you get to start speaking words of freedom rather than words of bondage. So, what is the situation that you desire to create? What is the reality that you want to see in your bank account? What is the reality that you desire in terms of how clients work with you? And you get to start speaking words of freedom rather than continuing to talk about the problem. So, noticing, how much am I going back to this and rehashing it? How much am I benefiting by sharing with others about this problem? Because it makes me look like, oh, other people are like, oh, poor you. Or, a lot of times we bond with people based on our wounds. So we stay stuck in the wound and stuck in the problem because we have some sort of emotional tie to somebody else through that. So you get to, this is, if you really want to shift and use this law powerfully, this law of fearlessly, you get to start fearlessly speaking about the reality that you're creating and the results that you're creating and that you desire, rather than about the problem. Because remember, if you listen to yesterday's, or it may have been 2 days ago's episode about the law of cause and effect, the problem, that's old news. That's an effect from something you caused a while back. So unless you want to keep making more of it, you got to stop talking about it, my friend. So I want to read to you a couple of little blurbs from this book, The Millionaire Moses, that's really been speaking to me about this particular law. And she says, Catherine Ponder says, when you try to overcome a problem and do not succeed, you have not failed. You are merely gaining an inner strength through your repeated efforts, which you will need to make your demonstration and to keep it. Like Moses, if at first you don't succeed, try again. So making the effort, persistence. But remember, this is the piece that's so important. And we'll talk about this more as we dig deeper into this law in particular, which is when you go for it and you make the effort and you are persistent and you have not yet succeeded, you haven't failed. You're simply gaining the inner strength that's necessary for you to truly accomplish the goal. Repeated efforts, right? So this is really important. To build that strength, it takes repeated efforts, which you will need to achieve the goal and keep it. And this is the important piece. And I've shared this on some other podcast episodes over, I don't know, the past month or so, that I really felt like for me, this summer was like my summer of wisdom in many ways. And there were things that felt like, you got to be kidding me. Like, what is going on? And there were times where I felt like I was showing up, doing the work, working on my mindset, working on old patterns, working on old habits. And still it was like nothing was budging, or there were periods where it felt like something was getting worse. And what I now know about that situation and about what was happening there is, it's one thing to have like a quick win or a quantum leap. This is why, lottery winners, they win the lottery and then most of them go bankrupt. They weren't able to keep it. They weren't able to sustain that level of abundance in their life and expansion in their life because it came so fast. So it's one thing to do that, but it's another thing to really be refined into the person who is a true vibrational match for what you want. And that often comes through repeated efforts and through developing that inner strength. And as I look at my own life and what I feel called to build and create with this community and for our family, there was a great deal of wisdom I needed to acquire that I'm still acquiring to this day, to be able to lead at the level I want to lead, to be able to make the impact I want to make, to be able to not just, hit big goals and targets, but also sustain them and then help teach other people how to duplicate that in their lives and be able to multiply from there. And so when we're showing up again and again, and we're doing the thing and it feels like it's failing or it feels like it's not happening, you can trust, like, it's not a failure. You're just being prepared with the inner strength that's required for you to achieve your goal and keep it. So we can kind of take a breath and breathe a sigh of relief and say, I'm not doing something wrong. I'm not being punished. I'm just being refined. So we get to use this to keep fearlessly showing up again and again and again in those moments. And then the second part that I want to read, and this will kind of tie us into what we're going to be talking about on the next part of this series. She says, it is often when you have struggled until you feel you cannot go on that your good begins to appear. It is often when you have struggled until you feel you cannot go on that your good begins to appear. And so this is what's the book? 3 Feet from Gold, 5 Feet from Gold. I think 3 Feet from Gold. Actually never read that one. So I should, no shoulds. It would be a good one for me to read though. But remembering that, right? Like when you reach that point, that moment where you feel like I can't go on, you've been putting yourself out there. Maybe you've been doing, I've got, women in the community who I know right now, where like they're doing daily lives, like they're putting themselves out there, they're showing up, they're doing new launches, they're building new programs. And sometimes there's a quick win. And it's like, of course we love those and those are fun, but that's not actually where the real strength is built. And it is in that moment where you feel like, what am I doing all this for? Right? Like you gotta be kidding me. Like maybe I'm just going to give up. That's when it starts to come. Like when you're truly being refined to be a match, a sustainable match for this goal and for this vision, that's when it kicks in. So we get to remember that. We get to remember to keep showing up fearlessly. We get to remember to keep speaking words of what we want over the situation rather than talking about the problem. And we get to watch it shift from there. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. We'll talk on our next episode about, we'll go deeper into this law on the next episode, maybe a few more, because there's really a lot to it. There's a lot of elements of it that you can use to help call in a greater level of prosperity in your life. So I'd love for you to connect with me on social. I'm at Elise Archer on all social. I'm always so grateful when you share these episodes with your community and with your network and someone who you think could benefit. And share with people. Like we're doing this series this month on prosperity laws. If you have other incredible people in your life like you who are going for more, maybe they're sales professionals, maybe they're entrepreneurs, but they're like ready to claim more, ready to break out of any sort of limiting money mindset in their lives, ready to step into their next level of financial expansion and not feel wrong or guilty about it. Like this is the place where I want you to bring your community together to learn this so that you can all be uplifted together. And as always, you can check out elisearcher.com for more resources, more goodies, more freebies for our group programs and private coaching options as well. Super grateful to have you in the She Sells community. And I'm excited to see you on our next episode where we will do a deeper dive.